Hi, my name is Xander Miller. For my seminar and educational inquiry research topic, I decided to do overfishing and the fishing industry. So a little bit why I chose this topic was because I grew up in Kenai, Alaska, which is a vibrant fishing community in southern Alaska. Lots of my family and friends were heavily involved in the fishing industry, so it's something that I'm familiar with. Here's just a few pictures of me and my family partaking in some fishing activities. My thesis for my research topic was overfishing by the commercial fishing industry is one of the largest contributors to environmental destruction worldwide. To resolve the problem of overfishing, stricter regulations must be put in place worldwide on the commercial fishing industry. To start out, it's important to define what overfishing is, and I really like the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization's definition of overfishing. So they state that fish stock abundance being fished to below the level producing maximum sustainable yield is overfishing. And so what maximum sustainable yield, or MSW, is a number of fish that should not, it's a level that's put on fish that should not be taken out of a specific species population in order for that species not to decline over time. So when you pass the limit, they're downwardly trending in their population. And this diagram really shows a nice picture of that, and that's why I like showing it. So the statistics on worldwide overfishing are pretty staggering. 31% of the world's fish population is overfished, and 58% is fished to the max. And that means to that MSW limit that we were talking about before. Another statistic that really shows the broad range of this comes from the World Bank, and World Bank states that fishing beyond biologically sustainable levels rose from 10% in 1974 to 34% in 2017. So here we see that this is a trend that's increasing, but it's also been going on for quite some time. And so those are the overfishing statistics, and now we'll jump into why that is a problem and its impact by looking at two significant fish species that have been overfished. So the two fish species that we're going to look at are Atlantic herring and Atlantic cod, because I like the way these two represent the interconnectedness of marine ecosystems, but they also will really help us paint a picture globally of what is occurring. So these graphs show the estimated stock abundance over a span of years for both Atlantic herring and Atlantic cod. And we can see that both of them are clearly decreasing significantly, with barely any time to rebound and allow for the stock to recover. And so that's a problem. And the reason is that Atlantic herring is the prey to Atlantic cod. So as their population decreases, it's going to negatively impact the Atlantic cod. And then theirs is going to decrease. And then there are multitudes of species connected to both of these. And so the whole ecosystem is going to feel the impact of overfishing of just one or two fish species, which we have here. Seals, for example, 50% of a seal's diet on the East Coast comes from Atlantic cod, according to the NOAA, which is National Oceanic Atmospheric Association. And so all this data is coming from NOAA, and so we can see clearly that there's a downward trend in these populations, and we're going to have an impact, or already are having an impact on the ecosystem. To take this even further, as we see here, we have a map, and as you can see, I've drawn out the red line on the East Coast, and to take it further is that both of these species are migratory. So they are going to fluctuate up and down the East Coast. They range from North Carolina to the waters of Greenland, and that's going to be dependent on seasons, chasing the herring, or many other fluctuations. So they're migratory, so they're not only playing a component in one ecosystem, but they're also playing a component in multiple. So something overfished in North Carolina is going to potentially affect an ecosystem and population thousands of nautical miles away in Greenland. And this is just one location on the East Coast, and 31% of the world's fish are overfished. So we have this occurring globally, migratory, so it's spanning the whole globe. And so I hope that really helps paint a picture of how significant this problem is and the interconnectedness of ocean ecosystems with overfishing impacting them. So it's a significant wide range impact. So we see that overfishing has a huge impact. We have multiple species being impacted, from cod, herring. Tuna is down 50% on the East Coast. Goliath grouper in South Florida is down 95%. And we've given the statistics on how 31% of the world's oceans or fish populations are overfished. And the statistics I've given are just accounted for the East Coast. So we know it's wide ranging, as previously mentioned. But how did this really start? And when did the history, what is the history of overfishing? And it plays a pretty significant role. And so there's a time when fish populations were not pulled out of the sea at the levels they are now, and no matter how much fish we took out of the ocean, it wasn't going to downwardly trend. We never would cross the MSW threshold. But largely after World War II, this drastically changed. So World War II was a heavy naval operation war, and during this time, many countries are developing new technologies for their boats and improving maritime operations overall. So come the end of World War II, all of these technologies, with all of the nations that developed them, would implement them into fishing, the fishing industry and fishing vessels. And so now we see sonar, radar, more efficient plastics and manufacturing in general applying to the fishing industry. And then the boats are more efficient, and people also start to put on fish processing stations on the boats themselves. So here we see that numerous countries have increased their ability to bring in fish because they have the ability to catch more. They can stay out at sea longer for numerous days and months, night and day, and they can just fish and pull out tons of fish at a level that's never been seen before. And then now it becomes common practice where we have the capability to go and reach out further for more fish. So then when stuff is decimated close to home, we go searching for more fish globally. And that is literally what has happened now in terms of the full-scale evolution of overfishing. And that is where we see the rapid increase of fish decline globally. It's largely seen from this point on in the development. And in the 21st century, we have way more efficient technology in boats, and we're pulling fish out of the ocean way faster than ever before. And this is why overfishing is such a problem and such a large impact. What we need to combat overfishing is regulations. And regulations on the fishing industry are nothing new. They've been around since post-World War II. And I'm going to show you two examples of regulations. One is probably the best example worldwide of fishing regulations, and the other is one of the worst catastrophes of the fishing industry and failing to promote the proper regulations. So on the right, we can see the marked out area of the Atlantic Ocean off the East Coast, and this is the location and area of where the worst case of fisheries management occurred. And this was our species of Atlantic cod that we mentioned earlier. So the government, Canadian and both American, set limits on catch, but it was much too high and depleted the source of cod, and the population was decimated. So, and to this day, it still has not recovered. Then we look all the way up north to Alaska. And Alaska is probably one of the best fisheries management we can see in the entire world. It's a state-run, government-funded regulation on the fisheries of Alaska, and they do a remarkable job to promote this, but also they are very proactive about it. They will close waters indefinitely. They're constantly monitoring the fish species. They'll close rivers and parts of the ocean off to certain fish or fishing indefinitely. They will enforce with fines, arrests, and there's just a lot of consequences for overfishing, so it doesn't happen as much. And they do a really good job, and they have seen huge success with rebounding populations such as the salmon and halibut. And they have also probably the best example, which I mentioned in my paper, the crab industry, which is probably one of the most regulated industries in America. And I talked about in my paper of how just the timeline and kind of how proactive it is. So these are just some of the best fisheries management we can see. The current state of world fishing regulations is actually much worse and in a very dire state compared to the example of the state of Alaska. So currently the only management globally of fisheries and fish stock and all of that is through the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization. It is an all-voluntary status code of conduct that they have written, and there are no incentives for joining, and there are also no penalties for failing to meet the requirements of the code of conduct. One statistic that is very shocking and disturbing is Australia, Norway, the US, Canada, and Iceland, which are the top nations and the highest scoring nations of compliance rate to the code of conduct, were actually only scored at a 60%. So they got a D grade on complying to the code of conduct for regulating overfishing globally. So this is a huge problem, because to stop overfishing, as we have seen with the interconnectedness of marine ecosystems and species reliance, that it has to be a global effort. So what I found with my research on overfishing and the solution to our global problem of overfishing is that we need worldwide regulations that nations are going to stick to. There's going to be incentives for them to abide by the rules, but also they see the importance of not destroying ocean biodiversity through overfishing. If not, the statistics for failing to stop overfishing are actually quite scary. Stanford University science report in 2006, which was conducted by international ecologists and economists, based on the data from the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization's fisheries data, released in their annual report from the years 1950 to 2003, they concluded that all species of wild seafood will collapse within 50 years unless we fundamentally change the way we manage all the ocean species together as working ecosystems. They say that if that's not the case, this century will be the last century of wild seafood. And when they mean collapse, they mean species will experience a 90% depletion of species baseline abundance. And I really like what co-author Stephen Palombi, who's a professor at Stanford of Biological Sciences, basically stated of why, just to paint a picture of why the ocean is so critical as one of the vital natural resources on Earth. The ocean is a great recycler. It takes sewage and recycles it into nutrients, scrubs toxins out of the water, and produces food and turns carbon dioxide into food and oxygen. But to provide all of those services, you need all of the parts of the ocean. You need all of the fish. So you can't have ecosystems destroyed through overfishing. You need all of the working parts, from fish, marine mammals, plant life, and overfishing destroys that and creates an imbalance and is trending our oceans to a very destructive place. So largely from my research, what I found is that we need to make a global regulation system. Largely we have what we need with the UN's groundwork, but we can take the example of like the state of Alaska and what they use to promote their longevity of fish populations and stop the destructive force of overfishing. So this has been my presentation on overfishing and its and the impact of it from the commercial fishing industry. And thank you very much for your time and watching the video.